Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see y'all early here. Congratulations. Early birds get the worms, right? We're going to sing a song by Peter Mayer. It's called Blue Boat Home. And does anybody know that song? Yeah, good. It's a familiar tune. Just join in as you're comfortable. Though below me I feel no motion, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean, still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now. Never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. Sun, my sail, and moon, my rudder, as I ply the starry sea, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions, are we kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the lights of the heavens in our beautiful blue boat home. I give thanks to the waves upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on, greet the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor nor port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. A blessing by John O'Donohue on waking. I give thanks for arriving safely in a new dawn, for the gift of eyes to see the world, the gift of mind to feel at home in my life. The waves of possibility breaking on the shore of dawn, the harvest of the past that awaits my hunger, and all the furtherings this new day will bring. Amen.
So we are so lucky we get another session with these two amazing men, and we've learned so much from them. So thank you, Leanne. As always, it was wonderful to start the day. So, gentlemen, do you want us to run these around?
Keep it here. I'll run it around. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning. How are you?
Getting centered.
Okay. I'm going to put this microphone here so it doesn't roll off.
Jim and I were comparing notes, and we both had a reflective evening after we left here last night, because there's this wrap-up session where we're supposed to pull together the loose pieces. And you never know what that is until you get there. And we both, it turns out, had some similar reactions last night.
So I want to begin by just echoing the prayer poem that we just heard. What are the furtherings of our time? What for you and for you, for you, for you? What are the furtherings of our time together? One of the concerns that Peter and I had was that, you know, maybe some of you may have experienced Peter or I or both of us up here with something like a fire hose. So I want to give you permission. Thank you for laughing at that question, and give you permission to recognize what we also recognize, that this is really challenging stuff. It turns out we happen to have been born at a really challenging time, and so, you know, if it feels to you like the past couple of days has been a little overwhelming, you know, a little causing you to teeter and totter and wonder and not be clear about what's next for you or what your furtherings are, we want to affirm that, and we want you to know we're sensitive to that. And our hope for this next hour is a time to kind of process that together. Because whatever you're feeling, whatever your takeaway is, you're not alone. That's the most important thing to recognize.
No matter who you are or where you are on the climate justice journey, you're welcome here.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. I did sit down last night and sort of looked at the schedule and said, what are the big pieces and what are the themes? And maybe as we dive into this, first of all, open up to you. Are there memorable moments? Were there times in the last 2 days that something just hit you hard? Or you said, finally somebody is saying what I've always wanted to hear said. So you know, first of all, and I recognize that some of you came with pre-existing passions and commitments, and this is an energizing chance to build on that. Others may have come looking for a page with some helpful hints about what you can do, and you got the fire hose. So we are coming at it from very different perspectives. But as we look back over Thursday and Friday, are there things that jump out at you?
Thank you. Yesterday, we weren't here for the Thursday session, so we just got here yesterday morning, Jim and I. Thank you for yesterday. Very powerful words, powerful thoughts, really gained a lot. I'm glad I came. And I think for me, the segment that was of most interest was yesterday evening. The question that had been kind of rolling around in my mind had been that transition plan and the huge human impact on people, communities, job loss, economic factors, and You know, many of us understand that dramatic change must occur soon, immediately, and we're involved in various aspects of trying to help and encourage that change, but other louder voices out there, the deniers and others that, you know, they have a pretty strong sales pitch that, you know, people are gonna lose jobs, you know, what's gonna happen to the economy. So thank you for the discussion of the transition plan. That really must be part of what we're all about, and is understanding the human impact and how we help people get through that.
Thank you. Anybody else with a powerful moment?
That's all I got.
The wombat. Twice. Yo, listen up. This place is your home. Others, you only got one. You remembered it. I told you to.
I moved recently from West Virginia, and when you talked about transitioning the people that work in the fields, well, we had 120,000 people mining coal 100 years ago, and it went to 20,000 and then 10,000 and now 6,000, and that was caused by the company automating. And nobody complained that they're losing their jobs, and yet we're, you know, trying very hard to do something different than that. But it's just shocked me that they got away with that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that historical perspective, Bill.
Yeah.
Following that awareness about West Virginia and coal, when Jim met with the pastors, so you're being led into the clergy group if you're not clergy, right? We talked about that, and we talked about the fact that we in Colorado have this issue of Weld County. And there are mostly men, but men and women who have worked in the oil fields forever. And so we talked about the fact that perhaps it was time for something like Together Colorado and the churches and congregations that attend to it to do two things. One is to push for the adoption in the legislature for what, you know, you would not use these words, but in other words, the California standards about cars and how long, et cetera, but that a part of that legislation should also be a retraining component for people in the oil fields who are fearing the end of their careers, and that it would address both things, the crisis and the people who will be hurt the most in many ways by the change. So, and that was like, let's do it. That's what my reaction was.
It sounds like Gus transition is a theme that has really resonated, which is interesting because the workshop on that topic this morning has the smallest sign up of all of the sessions.
Interesting.
One of the things, I mean, of course, the keynotes were brilliant. Of course. But one of the things that just slammed into me was Blue Boat Home this morning, that song. And I sobbed all the way through it. I was hit on a visceral level, not a gut level, but a soul level. And I just fell in love with creation all over again.
Amen.
And saw myself in that whole vast sweep of navigating through, I mean, and the power of music and the power of poetry. We in the church need that. Thank you, thank you.
For me, a high point was horizontal theology and process theology as expanding our understanding of creation in the image of God. All of creation is in the image of God, not just the human species. And it brought it all together. We've talked about these things at Wash Park. The other thing is, for 15 months, I was in Moffett County, and Moffett County is the coal version of Weld County. Moffett and Routt counties. Those coal mines are shutting down, and they're being shut down not by climate justice, but by natural gas. And yet the two power plants in that area provide electricity to the western third of the country. That's huge. When I started going out there were, yard signs everywhere. Coal, it keeps the lights on. That's how important the transition plan is for those individuals. Now, a word of hope. Rifle is about 40 miles south of Craig, and all of the city functions of government, et cetera, are powered by solar panels. When I was in Craig, folks were trying to get Craig to start producing solar panels as the transition plan. Nobody wanted to talk about it then, but I think they're talking about it now. And that's hopeful.
Yes. Couple more?
I thought I knew a lot about the divestment of our money into fossil fuels, but in the session yesterday, an eye-opener, I didn't realize how much insurance companies were involved. So that was a big eye-opener for me.
Oh, there we go. David.
Two things really. One was a workshop that where I learned that there's a lot we can do with our building, which is kind of nice to learn because our boiler's dying, and the replacement will be much better for the climate in the church. The other thing, the workshop, Everything is God, reminded me that form changes and function changes, and it's still all us from below the ground up. And that gives me hope, because whatever happens and whatever little I can do or whatever any of us here accomplish, we're all still connected, always, all the time.
I simply wanted to mention, I wasn't at home at the time, but my dad worked for General Motors. And when they automated, that was a dilemma for my dad, because he was not educated enough to translate over into that new world. And he took the option of retiring early because he understood his position, and fortunately he had enough years in that he was able to do so somewhat comfortably. But there's so many issues surrounding how we reinvent our society and our world. And we have to be really thoughtful about it. I don't have the answers, of course, but I'm so pleased we're talking about it.
A generation ago, coal kept the lights on. We might, as we go through this, recognize and honor the people that did that. And maybe the way to do that is to bring one of these geothermal manufacturing plants to where the coal was manufactured and get jobs that way.
Yep.
And send the geothermal pumps to Germany to deal with their problem.
We're going to fill up this time right away.
This is
Jim.
good. This is good.
So I agree with everything everybody's saying. And for me, I'm looking for little things that I can take back to the congregation and make sure that they understand what needs to be done. And our congregation is smart enough, and they may already be doing some of these things, but there are some new things that they might not know. So.
I've been thinking about the arc of time and how churches are so used to talking about things that happened thousands of years ago. So we're used to moving slowly, and that we need to look at the time differently because we're having to move really quickly. And what a shock that is for the church culture, because we want to just take our time, do it slowly, and we don't have that kind of time. And I've been thinking about we need to learn from our children who don't have the perspective of more than, this week. Maybe we can speed it up a little.
There's a rewording of a classic hymn that says, like a mighty tortoise moves the church of God. People, we are treading where we've always trod.
I attended more as an individual. We've got a conference happening. We've got ministers with churches. We've got, not a hierarchy, but expanding number of people being reached. And I'm feel more like one of them, and overwhelmed with the discussion of so many directions that can be gone, and where is your power, and what can you do with it, and I feel like for a lot of people that's immobilizing, and I need direction or whatever. I'm with Lakewood United UCC on the Care for Creation Committee, and I realize that I keep being drawn to, just pick one thing and get it done, and I chose getting composting to Lakewood and, through the church. But it doesn't feel very empowered. I still feel I'm under an avalanche of to-dos, so this was very inspiring and at the same time overwhelming, like, I'll just go back to bed, I don't know.
Thank you for naming that, Sue, because that's what was bubbling up for both Jim and me last night as we were realizing we were hearing that sort of under the surface.
Right.
And this isn't, people are going to leave here and they're going to go home, and in 2 weeks, the energy will be gone. And that's not where we want to leave you.
I want to piggyback on what Jackie was saying. I think what I'm coming away with is a renewed sense of urgency. I have a friend that refers that, we're changing at the speed of church. And tortoise is a good imagery that goes along with that. But just that sense, my grandson just graduated from university with a degree in sustainability. And quite frankly, listening to him gives me a lot more hope. There's a part of me that looks around at the demographic that's here as far as age is concerned, and that gives me hope as well, because the fact that there are as many folks about my age that are as concerned about this gives me hope, because my overall impression is it's folks like us that are in the way. And so I'm coming away hopeful.
I'll be back.
You know what, I have to say that I agree with this gentleman because there is a legacy of coal miners and oil workers. My husband always says, my grandfathers worked in the coal mines. And that was a hard job, and they died early. And it was something that, while we know that it was not healthful, they were proud and they were doing what they thought was best. And I do think that it's important to honor their service, if you will. And as well as the oil workers. They take time away from their families and they get paid well for that, but not enough. So I do agree with that. And I think the other thing was focus. Focus on one thing. I wrote that big in my notebook yesterday. Focus on one thing and then move on to the next after that's accomplished. And the other thing that I am going to ask that you do, because you are both very fast speakers, to please list the names of the people that we need to divest from funds from. I heard Wells Fargo, and I heard Chase. Here, wait, I need to write this down.
Jim?
Well, you got two of them, Wells Fargo, Chase, Citi, and Bank of America. Thank you. That's the big four. The list is longer, of course, but those are the big four.
Last comment here?
I have a question, I think, Peter, or maybe it's for you, Jim, that's been raised by this conference itself. I'm pretty much interpreting that the purpose of this conference was to help us focus on the ecological issues that face us. Why don't you speculate a little bit about why that might be more important than, say, race matters or nuclear disarmament or economic injustice in America, around the world, or whatever the other issues are? Why is this more important?
Do I have to say thank you, Jim, for raising that question? I'm going to circle back to that a little bit later. I'm not going to try and answer it right now, okay? Thank you all for your very helpful comments. As we look at what might happen in our region with the United Church of Christ and with faith communities in general, I'm hearing that just transition from a pastoral and a community-based perspective, as well as economic and climate justice, needs to be something that we take on very seriously. And that may be a specific that we can claim out of this that I wouldn't have named before this morning.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So thank you for that. And let me wrap up my own question. What was a powerful moment yesterday morning in this room during Allison's worship service as she kept beating that drum? I knew what was coming. And it just went on forever with the parts per million that we have gone over the limit, and that is in 30 years. The urgency slammed me at that moment, even though I knew what was coming. So thank you, Allison. Thanks to all of you. And thank you, Jim, for taking notes.
I have a few notes here. We will move on to respond to some of this in a second, but I want to, for myself, say how I will go back and report to my wife about this conference, and the thing I will focus on most is the worship services. because they nurtured my soul. And I speak, God knows how many events like this I have spoken to, but it's, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And to show up and not just contribute in terms of my own vocation and background, but to receive, to be ministered to by people who both get it in terms of the issue, right? And then translate that, get it, to worship. I have just felt so blessed by that. But I want to then bridge from my own personal experience to both invite and challenge the pastors and other people who help shape liturgy in any of your churches to recognize that a big takeaway from this conference is the hard work of scratching your heads about that tortoise we call church and wondering, how can the weekly experience of church actually begin to take in the reality that we have been looking at here, right? Because that's what has to happen. And then the power of church can begin to be leveraged to help all of us, churchgoers as well as the increasingly large numbers of non-churchgoers, to make the just transition that we've identified as a central feature of this. The church has been essential in every social transition civilization has made. People of faith have been leaders in every social transition civilization has made over the past 6,000 to 10,000 years. And so figuring out ways in which, that old tortoise thing we called church just can't continue the way it was, because it will not, doing that will not utilize the power we have been given and called to in worship to actually address the crisis of creation that we are in the midst of. And so I guess my hope for outcome, one outcome of this gathering, is that each congregation which has in one way or another participated here will go home and ask this question about, what pivots, what alterations can we make in the practice of worship and the other manifestations of God's called community, so that we can become so that our community, our church, can become yet more and more engaged in this issue. I think that possibility has really been planted here in our time together through the workshops and through what Peter and I have had to say.
And Jim and I and the conference planning team looked at this event and shaped it around what I expressed yesterday as, what does it mean to be the church in this sort of a time? And that is a deeper question than what can the church do? Which is also an essential question that we need to answer, because I tend to go off into vague philosophical things and not give you any practical handles to work with, Sue. But what does it mean to be the church? How do we lift up hope and moral vision? Allison and I did a workshop yesterday morning on earth-aware worship, and sort of started off with a question, well, how often can you do this if it's more than just Earth Day? And the conclusion that we left with people is that if there's an underlying theme, an awareness of the world and the crisis that we live in, it will bubble up into the service every week. Maybe never naming climate change at all, but we will build the foundation so that on those occasions when we need to speak boldly, the congregation goes, well, of course that's what we have to say. We need both the foundation and the specific implementations. And it's a challenge finding that balance.
It is. It is. And at least when I hear you say what you just said, Peter, it leads me to just offer a brief comment in response to this question about, how is it that climate change is the sort of umbrella issue or the front issue when there are so many other justice issues. And I think if, as a congregation begins to really accept the challenge of relevant worship in this day, which is my way of phrasing what Peter just said. As you begin to do that, then that relevant worship will actually answer this question. It will answer the question of how it is climate change is actually the unspoken headline around the issue of the border down the Texas and New Mexico border and Arizona border down there. Then you will begin to answer the question of how climate change is the overarching issue when it comes to all of these questions about fair employment and jobs. You'll begin to understand how it is that the 400 plus years of oppression, made evident by the 1619 Project, is all exacerbated by the shifting climate that we are all in the midst of, that we all find ourselves in. And church is the place to become more aware of that and receive God's power to utilize our gifts to address it.
A number of years ago, Black theologian James Cone said that the same mindset that led to, I forget the exact phrasing, the same mindset that led to the enslavement of African people and the subjugation of whole communities is the same mindset that's leading to the devastation of the earth. Somebody yesterday came up to me after my talk and said, it's not Christianity per se that has led to the notion of domination of the earth. That's colonialism. That's the mindset of white supremacy, which the Western church has been all too willing to be complicit with.
Right.
And we have given some of the justifications for it. So Jim, these are intertwined. If we start to think of them as separate little issues, we're going to be battling for airtime and attention, and we're not going to make headway on any of them. My talk yesterday said we've got to look at 3 circles of neighbor that keep expanding. And if we are looking at the global human community, that has issues of race and class and gender that are totally intermixed with issues of climate justice. And so we need to find common ground and not fight about who has the right issue. Bill, briefly? You were the one who came up and told me that, so.
One of the things that has come up at one of the more important aspects of this conference, which is meals, has been the understanding of I'm really tired. I've been doing this too long. I don't feel supported. Can either of you speak to the whole issue of the care and feeding of volunteers?
No.
I think I just got hopeless.
The Creation Justice League of the Rocky Mountain Conference, that emerging and informal group did a survey of a number of congregations last summer, and one of the themes that emerged was, we're just burned out. We've been fighting these things in our churches for too long, and maybe we've been fighting unwinnable fights when we put all of our emphasis on, do we use styrofoam cups or china cups for coffee hour? And it's a question of waste, or do I have to wash the dishes? And so we get caught in battles that are just exhausting. But we do need to take care of ourselves, because I burned myself out completely in my 20 years of work with Eco Justice Ministries. I understand that problem. But in lots of our churches, we have heroic people who have been lifting up these causes, not being supported, and they're not feeling terribly excited about taking it on yet again. And so the Creation Justice League is perhaps one forum in which we can have that support within the Rocky Mountain Conference and keep in touch with each other. I'll probably be circling back to this later, but the card table out in the hall with a bright colored tablecloth has little sign-up slips. And if you want to connect with that network and see what might emerge out of this conference, get your name and email address down there. And I think we will also, Jeff, be doing a follow-up email to all the people who have registered for this conference, just to touch base on what comes next. We're not going to walk away this afternoon and say, well, that was fun. What's the theme next time? We will keep working on it. We will keep supporting the volunteers.
And let me add to it. Go ahead, please.
Jackie's been on the planning committee, so. And I think you're the one who said we need the next one to be on climate justice.
I am. My daughters are in their 30s. And my daughters love church and are in church every Sunday.
Amen.
But my daughters who have been raised in church, love God, are going, the church is stupid. The church is stupid because they don't get that that generation are starting from an entirely different set of assumptions. They helped me move denominations a few years ago. They're like, we're tired of the hypocrisy. And they came to me and said, we're moving. Mom, come too. And I'm like, okay. So their assumptions are any church worth its salt is going to deal with climate change every single day. And their assumption is any church worth going to is going to be anti-racist and gay affirming. Their assumption is any church who isn't there already isn't worth the investment. And so all our efforts to try to step up and move up, we just need to start over. We got to have a set of assumptions to start with. So yes, it was me who pushed for the climate justice, because if we don't live, if we can't survive on this planet, none of the other stuff matters. And if we do climate justice correctly, all the other stuff matters. Everything lines up. But we are so slow to step into each separate thing, we're missing the point. We have a generation gap that we have never seen before. You know, my kids talk a different language. They write their words differently. They have a whole different set of assumptions. So, you know, we not only have to hurry up, we need to just drop a bunch of junk along the way and get there. You know, my kids get so impatient with the discussion over styrofoam cups. They're like, duh, be there already. You know, one of the things Pastor Selena that works with me says all the time is make everything we do about that, about justice. Make everything look through the lens of justice. We don't write anything, we don't do anything without looking through that. So this is a beginning of a new foundation for a church. And we have been missing that. We've been missing in our tortoise way of moving in the world, that we have to move not only quicker, but we need to shake up the very foundation of who we are and what we're about. My kids couldn't even get around to having children because they're so sure climate change will ruin the world. So I finally got one that had a child. I finally have one grandchild, and the other one, they're wrestling every day with whether or not they should have a child because it makes such a huge carbon footprint. Okay, my kids can't even have kids because of this issue. So it may be, for all of us, it may be, well, we could deal with it or not. But for them, it's an everyday thing. And if we're missing that, we're not talking to them. So.
We just did.
We just did. That's
John
right.
Torhauer, our current UCC president, has written about Church 3.0, which has been a fuzzy concept for many of us, and I think you just named it. It is not how do we redo the hymns on Sunday morning, it's how do we have a different value set, yeah. So.
And I have to say, what I was about to say, I was so glad that you got the mic, but what I was about to say was essentially echoing what you then said much better, which is any of you can do something that I encouraged our congregations in Massachusetts to do while I was conference minister, and that is connect with 350.org or Extinction Rebellion or any of a number of more localized youth-led climate initiatives. They will be shocked, to your point, that a church is connecting with us? Really? And learn from them, partner with them. Our UCC church in San Mateo, a church where I have spoken and led an event like this, did exactly that. And, this 16-year-old woman who I don't think had ever been affiliated with church ended up, quite to her own surprise, kind of connecting with that congregation because she had been the leader of the youth uprising or whatever the San Mateo version was of 350. And then she was invited to speak at church, and she found all these, for lack of a better word, kindred souls. That her impression of church, largely shaped by, as our whole society is, Fox News' understanding of what Christianity is, her impression of church was she would never darken the door. And now she's a full participating member there. So all of us need to recognize the fundamental pivots church life must make, in part in response to the fundamental pivot creation itself is in the process of. And we can do it. And you've just testified to how important it is. So thank you. Yeah.
I actually typed up a list of things to talk about this morning instead of my little handwritten scraps. So, and we may not hit all of them. But as we talk about that, it is important to acknowledge right now that the Rocky Mountain Conference of the United Church of Christ is in a very rough spot. Many of you are familiar with what's been going on with staffing issues in the conference. We had claimed a strong emphasis on anti-racism and racial justice, and then that staff person was fired. We are in a transition time with conference minister. we're not in a place where we can say, well, the conference will step out boldly and lead us in this. It may be us folk who flip it around and say, we will lead the conference. Or as the conference has said, we are the conference, and then there are some people who work on the staff and serve on the committees. We are the church. But it is a difficult time for the regional expression of our particular denomination. And so we are going to have to work within that context. We're going to have to do some things for ourselves that in other times might have staff support. We may have to be more outspoken in claiming priorities. And that is an opportunity as well as a hindrance right now. We are in a place where our conference will be looking for directions and energy and passion. And if we are able to go to the conference meeting in June, incidentally, held in Grand Junction, a red county with a lot of oil and gas sort of stuff in the region, and say, we think this conference needs to focus on just transition as one of our priorities. That might have some resonance, it might give us some credibility, it might help us to make ourselves more visible in our communities, and we have that opportunity now as we are saying, what can we as a conference be and do?
And let me just build on what Peter just said, and I can say this boldly from very direct experience. As you were speaking, Peter, I was just thinking, oh my God, wouldn't that be something if in your search for a new conference minister, the notion of the Colorado Conference,
the Rocky
Mountain Conference is 100% behind the idea of making a priority, an expression for our entire region of a just transition, because we take climate seriously. Well, I can tell you there's a lot of people who might be currently kind of in line to become a conference minister someplace who, when they heard that, would look in the mirror and say, geez, maybe I won't apply for that conference. And that would be a good thing. And there might be some other people who would be fabulous conference ministers who would never think to do that lousy job, having done it for 12 years, because they can't imagine that a conference might feature and elevate just transition, particularly a conference that includes quite a mixture, if I might say, of red and blue areas, right? I think this is a great idea. And I think the timing of us being here in late February and your unfortunate circumstances in relation to the transition of your conference minister and your annual meeting coming up, I think you really put it together really well there. Thank you for asking. I won't be smarmy and say been there, done that. But no, God. Okay, just one more comment about conference ministry. It is such a hard job, and our denomination does not elevate leaders. I won't say the follow-up line, what is it that we do with leaders? You all can fill in that blank. Because of our nature as a denomination, providing leadership is a very, very, very difficult thing. So when looking for a new conference minister, you want to make sure that she or he recognizes that. Nobody should take on that job naively, that's for sure. But to elevate this conversation in the context of your search, I think will literally sort out some candidates and attract some new candidates that might not otherwise imagine stepping into that leadership position.
I'm relatively new to this part of the country, but it seems to
Brian,
me
have handheld.
that this particular conference with all of the little pieces of states and a whole big one in the middle,
Yeah.
this is the critical issue for the people in this conference. UCC or evangelical, red or blue, whatever. It is the future of this part of the country, if not the universe, of course. And that would be a very compelling, unifying thing for both the church and the state of Colorado, among others.
Exactly.
You know, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, yeah.
I think
And you know what?
Really important.
I could imagine, you know, what's the major newspaper in Denver?
Denver Post.
I could imagine the Denver Post writing an article on it. Because believe me, the media would be surprised. Oh my goodness, there's a denomination who is looking for a new leader for our region, and they're emphasizing addressing just transition because of climate change as part of like the job requirement. Holy cow. And you know, imagine what that might do to attract friends of your daughters to say, God, I never thought I'd darken the door of a church, but maybe I ought to check it out.
And it might decrease the age of the applicants by a few decades.
Indeed, maybe, you know, yeah, I mean, that goes both ways. Having a the phrase young conference minister causes me to tremble a little bit because the position requires, you know, a whole lot of familiarity with diverse congregational circumstances and all of that. And yet, exactly. We just have to, we just have to be open and find new pathways forward. Yeah.
And it wouldn't be the program, it would be the focus.
Yeah.
The center.
Yeah. Well, and this is, when you said it that way, it made me realize the story that I told yesterday when I was sitting here about how when I was being called to my position, and I said, wait, there's just one more thing. I need to spend 10% of my job doing climate. And they all looked at me cross-eyed. You know, this is a furtherance of that, saying, by the way, don't apply for the job unless you're capable of leading a denomination in just transition. And there'd be a whole lot of people who say, God, what does that mean? Well, okay, don't apply. Thanks much. You go to a different conference, you know? Yeah, but what would happen then, as soon as I said go to a different conference, I realized this is what should be happening in every conference. And it's what should be happening in every denomination, right? But I can tell you, and I say it with a little bit of pride, I will confess, but I can tell you, as Peter pointed out, I think it was you, Peter, that said it 2 days ago, that the United Church of Christ is the leading denomination in relation to this issue. And the reason is because over the past 20 years, folks like Peter and I and some of you have been willing to say, darn it all, that's what it means to be a Christian in this life, is to put our voices forward in that regard. So, recognizing that plays a significant role in conference leadership could influence other conferences to recognize the same thing. And so that becomes a leadership lever at another level. Yeah. Okay, I thank you for putting up with that.
Yeah. And it also occurs to me that, you know, the Rocky Mountain Conference and other denominations in our region, compared to other parts of the country, have often not been terribly engaged in political action and moral leadership. And I think that's in part because many of the denominations are spread across different states where the agendas are different. You know, UCC conference is in 3 huge states. The Lutherans are in, 7 states? All the way from El Paso up into Montana. And you can't do the advocacy stuff when it's that diffuse. But just transition is something that is really important for our 3 states together. It rings true in our entire region.
Exactly.
We were worried about filling up our time this morning. And we still have 45 minutes on the schedule. So, Jim, let me just check with you in front of everybody else. We had talked about some of the, what about people who've been blasted by the fire hose and too many issues and too high expectations? Do we need to touch base on that and have some more conversation in those directions? Or are we on a track now that we need to stick with?
Well, I think this track is very important, and I think it's also not universal. I think it's perfectly fine, for example, in the past 10 minutes to have felt some real enthusiasm around just transition, around the implications maybe for your successor conference minister, and to still feel like, what am I going to do when I go home? How does what I have heard impact my heart in a way that I'm going to look at my calendar and make some changes in how I'm going to spend the time God has given me in the near future, so that my heart can become still more open to responding to this call from God to address the climate crisis. You know, there's an old thing, and probably everyone who has ever attended a church has heard their pastor at some time use this as an illustration, often around stewardship time. And the story, it's a simple story. It goes like this: that when you go to heaven and you meet St. Peter at the gate, St. Peter will ask to look at 2 books: your checkbook and your appointment book. And the only question St. Peter will ask is, can I tell by looking at the checkbook and the appointment book that this person was a faithful Christian? So some of you haven't heard that story, huh? I preached it many times, I can tell you that. And what that story is about is vocation. It's about calling. The word vocation comes from the Latin vocare, which is to be called, and it relates to the notion of obedience, to follow a call. And there's no doubt that, you know, what is most prominent in our lives, which isn't to say that everybody recognizes it or even that most people recognize it, what is most prominent in our lives is, as Peter and I both use this phrase, the continuity of creation has been broken. That is actually the thing most prominent in our lives, in contrast to our human predecessors over the past 10,000 years. Because they all lived in a contiguous climate which allowed people no longer to be nomadic and run away from the ice ages, right? That's what happened in the 50,000 years prior to the last 10,000 years. People had to migrate as the ice would come and go, right? And then all of a sudden, that ice thing, those ice ages stopped, and people said, oh my God, we can actually settle down. And we can build pyramids and ziggurats. And we can build the Library of Alexandria. And so forth, and so forth. That's what allowed civilization. And that time is over. We're not living in that time anymore. That time is over. So the real question is, will we be able to look at our checkbooks and our appointment books and say, you know, you can sort of see here when I realized that time was over, and I begin to, you know, do a few things each week that had to do with that. And I began to maybe, address my resources, my financial resources, a little differently because of that. I know a couple of people here have recently made commitments and changed their heating system in their home to a heat pump. And it is not the case that everybody in this room could or should do that, but there may be some people in this room who have the financial resources, and it just never occurred to you that you should allocate your capital to make that transition.
And I will add, the furnace that we replaced 2 weeks ago was 30 years old, and we kept worrying if it was going to make it through the winter. We needed to replace the furnace anyway. And so it would have been unconscionable if we had just stuck in another gas furnace. At the time that comes to make those decisions, we need to do it the right way. To do it just because, oh, well, I want to be greener than my neighbors, so I'm going to replace my 4-year-old furnace with a heat pump, probably is not as responsible.
And then to talk about it. Part of the reason I brought it up was to get Peter to talk about it. And I would be shocked if there isn't somebody sitting out here who maybe for the first time, maybe it's already occurred to you, we really should do that. The sort of we really should do that kind of experience. Again, we have one of the things that didn't come up in the list of things that you label, but it did come up in our conversations, was kind of individual personal actions versus collective actions. And the answer to that is both and. That's the answer to that. And I sense that you all that's part of your takeaway from that. But I wanted to, in this opportunity of wrap up, I wanted to come back to that theme and just put it out there. The answer is both and. Because on your appointment book would show up those personal commitments of changes you're making in your personal lives, as well as those systemic commitments that you are joining hands with others in trying to make systemic changes, in your region and in your town.
Last night, Jim was insistent that we in the church need to be more serious about civil disobedience as the thing that can actually change society. How many of you felt really uncomfortable with that? Well, the church can do that, but I'm sure not going to. Let me buffer that a little bit. I can't remember when I talked about it. I was in a civil disobedience thing 6 or 7 years ago and did not get arrested. And there were 10 of us, I think, who had trained to do the civil disobedience action and had knowingly said, oh, this could turn nasty and be jail time sort of stuff. If 10 of us would have turned up at that Holiday Inn, we alone would have been a non-event. They would have locked the doors and we would have stood outside and looked pretty foolish. There were like 300 or 500 other people who were there as allies and accomplices in this movement. And we gathered at the Park and Ride across the main street and got ourselves organized, and then the people in the yellow vests went and blocked traffic for 3 minutes as we marched across the street. And the crowd gathered outside the Holiday Inn with big political art installations and chanting and singing, and they created the turmoil. A few of us tried to get in the doors to the meeting room and couldn't do it. And while we were doing that, the crowd got into the hotel lobby and occupied that space and refused to leave when they were asked to leave. They were doing a better job with civil disobedience than we were, but they gathered as the allies. And that second tier of support and commitment is essential to the social change work. To have the folks who will speak up, something's in the news and in church or with your circle of friends, you say, you know, I'm really glad they were out there doing that, is what amplifies the effect. Jeff Newman Lee on Thursday afternoon did a great workshop on effective political action, but he has devoted to 10 years of his life intensively to doing that sort of political organizing and teaching the Denver City Council what the issues are so that the lobbying can start to do something. Not all of us can do that work. Oh. Brian?
I actually have something relevant to this topic on the live stream. Jean Nelson in the live chat said that this Tuesday, February 28th, Together Colorado is sponsoring a Faith Action Lobby Day from 8 to 12 with training on how to speak to your state legislators. They are meeting at 1600 Grant Street at St. Paul's Lutheran Church. So this just seemed to be relevant to the conversation, but Jean Nelson on the live stream said that.
Thank you, Nelson. It's good to know there are people out there. The flyers from Together Colorado are on the table down by the coffee pots. And these lobby days are well organized. If you haven't done it before, they will walk you through the process. They will pair you up with people who know what's going on. If you want to begin to step into that sort of activism, this is a great place to do it. So Together Colorado, just a second, Jackie. Looking a little bit farther out, on March 21st, there is a national or international day pointed towards that sort of financial activism, the 4 big banks. And that's a group that Jim may talk more about, the Third Act and the Stop the Money Pipeline, and others are organizing that. You don't have to build this movement yourself. You can join with those people on Tuesday, March 21st. And here in the Denver area, it's at a Chase Bank near Monaco and Evans. And you can join the thing in process.
If you go to the website, Third Act, spelled THIRDACT, so not the number 3, THIRDACT.org, you'll find on there a map. And what's happening is the same thing that happened in 2008 or 2009 when 350.org was born and the climate movement was born. And that was, back in 2009, a bunch of undergrads, 7 of them, at Middlebury College with their professor, Bill McKibben, had in mind doing a, quote, day of action. And they imagined, maybe at most 5 actions taking place. And my vague recollection was there were 1,300 actions that
we had 31 of them in the Metro Denver area.
Yeah. And what's happening with this organization, Third Act, which has only been around for a little over a year, is Bill McKibben turned 60, and he decided people in their third act of life, which is most of us in this room, have more assets than is imaginable. 70% of the wealth in America is in the pockets of people over 60. 70% of the wealth in America is in the pockets of people over 60. Okay, it may not be your pocket, okay, I appreciate that. So that's one thing that elders have. But guess what else we have? We have experience, right? And we have perspective, right? And what Bill has done is taken the strategies he and those young people figured out from 2009 until now, and he's applying it to us oldsters, us elders, and calling us, and I believe that's the appropriate religious word to use, calling us as older people to recognize the opportunity we have living in this particular precarious time to bear witness for the remainder of our days. And so it sounds like I'm putting all of that in religious language, but it turns out that's language which this secular organization is more than willing to use. So there's Third Act is divided up regionally. There's a Denver chapter, and then there are other chapters. It turns out my wife and I are going to be down in North Carolina, and we are going to be present at the Third Act Action, which happens to be my birthday, March 21st, in Durham, North Carolina. So I've made a whole ton of new friends down in Durham North. They've asked me to speak down there. The UCC Church in Chapel Hill is hosting me to have a big book read that evening and so forth. The possibilities here are enormous. And so if one of the things that's happening with you this morning is sitting there thinking, God, how am I going to kind of motivate my congregation to engage this issue, and you feel like you're butting your head up against some walls, in addition to figuring that out, you can also just find a bunch of support by locking arms with people through an organization like Third Act. Yeah.
I was just going to say that I'm one of the Our Whole Lives instructors in the conference, and one of the things that we do with our youth is they make these little yellow and blue buttons that say, I'll go with you, because there's so much violence against people that are trans when they go to the restroom. So our youth will volunteer to just go with someone to the restroom. Just be that ally that's just holding space to keep it safe for them. We can do the same thing as churches. We can, I'll go with you. There's a justice issue. It's a great way to learn more about that justice issue, whether it's a racism issue, a climate change issue, whatever it is, I'll go with you. That can be our church's thing. We go with the people that are trying to hold holy space.
And that may be one of the differences from what Jim was saying, that the church has bled all of the important social movements. It may be that the church is now a force that joins with the great social movements. David.
One of the joys of an event like this is that there is a misery of choices for events that you might participate in. And so I know I've missed things, but then I've also been at a lot of great things here. And we've talked about, done a great job of delineating the problems and the risks. And we've done a great job of talking about possible solutions, things that we can do, and the power of worship. One thing I haven't heard, and I apologize if I've missed it, is that there is something here that we can all do if there is a God, and if God's DNA permeates all of creation, and if God is accessible, then any one of us, regardless of our resources of health or time or money, can pray for healing, can meditate on healing, can individually focus on the earth healing itself, which includes all of us, and it will make a difference. It does have an impact. It is something we can do that is effective movement toward change. I promise you that.
Can I just add a word to that? I just want to thank you so much. When we dismiss today, I'm going to go visit the Denver Zoo. And the reason I'm going to go visit the Denver Zoo, you have articulated perfectly. It's because I want to look a diverse bunch of animals in the eye, and I want to pray for the species that have gone extinct and the ones that are on the boundary of that. And And I looked forward to it, just as you were suggesting. It's going to be like a 3-hour worship experience for me. And I didn't imagine I would share that with you, but thanks for your prompt. And I just wanted to, we can incorporate this kind of, and this goes back to the question that we have to take care of ourselves. Whoever raised that question. We have to be careful and take care of ourselves. And this is a way in which I'm going to do that and incorporate what you've just said. Thank you.
And Jim, as you go to the zoo, if you visit the tigers, be careful because the tigers have a walkway over you and it's not waterproof.
Local knowledge, it's always good.
I'm Bob Von Trieber. I'm the interim pastor here at First Plymouth. And speaking of Jim going to the zoo, just in case you don't have other commitments for tomorrow, Jim will be our guest preacher here for worship at 10 o'clock in the morning. So he'll be visiting the zoo here tomorrow. So, a question for the two of you and maybe other folks here who have worked on this. You know, we've talked about how tortoisey the church can be about responding to this issue. What do you think have been the biggest resistances in the church? It's from the churches that you have worked with to getting on board with this issue. Any thoughts about why we've been so slow about responding?
You're pointing at me, Jim.
Well, I'm just saying, go ahead if you want to go first. I'll be glad to speak also.
This is historic, not current. And I hinted at it in the keynote yesterday when I talked about the surface and system views of the world. One of the things that I will list as my great life achievements is my work over a period of 10 or 15 years with the national level of the United Church of Christ. And I mentioned I had helped take 2 resolutions to General Synod saying our denomination needs to figure out why we cannot talk about climate change. Because there was active resistance to that.
And say the years.
We started raising those issues in 1999 with a resolution to Synod that says we need to just study what our denomination is doing so we know. And we studied it and said, oh, well, I guess we're not doing anything. And so he came back with a resolution in 2003, I think it was, that talked about creating a task force on climate and was combined with another one on energy. And that task force in UCC style was required to have a diversity of voices and representations on the task force. And we started meeting in person and on conference calls. And we hit exactly the same resistance that we had seen in the denomination, which primarily was the people who had been fighting, and the UCC, the irony of this is that the UCC was renowned for our strong stances on environmental justice. Our denomination coined the term environmental racism.
Back in the mid-1980s.
And we were the church that created that, and we could not talk about climate change. And we would be meeting in a task force and we would just talk past each other because we had people who had been heroes in that movement. And the trust levels were terrible and it was absolutely mystifying. And we gathered for 3 or 4 days in Berkeley, California to keep working at this. And we were talking, and finally one of the women who had been fighting against hog farms in North Carolina, horrible problems of pollution and health issues, burst out and say, I don't care if I never see another tree in my life as long as my grandson does not have asthma. And we all stopped cold and I at least went, that doesn't make any sense. And my, she is angry. And that is the point, as we took a 15-minute break to regroup and somebody went with her outside to sit and just listen to her, I went, there was that Sierra Club study. That's what's going on here. And over the next 2 days, we figured out that those of us who were raising climate change and ocean health and endangered species issues looked at nature as system. And this is the web of life that God has created. The people who were passionate in doing environmental justice work looked at nature as surface. They lived in their local environment, and that place was getting dirty. And when it got dirty and polluted, people were hurt, usually unjustly. And those people who had been fighting for environmental justice looked at those of us who were talking about the global issues and saw us as a batch of elitists who wanted to preserve the pretty places so we could go on vacation. We had two absolutely separated definitions for the word environment. And we were both using our language and thinking that the other side understood it. Coming out of that meeting, we discerned that the word eco-justice was some sort of shared space. And we started working with the collegium, the 4 central officers of the denomination, and educating them. And then it worked down into the agencies of the church. And within 2 or 3 years, the theology and the practice of the denomination changed. And so I get really jumpy when people say, oh, stop arguing about language and just go do something. Because it took 12 years of working through a definition of the word environment to change our denomination from one that could not talk about climate change to one that is the leader on climate change. That is part of the question of why can't we do anything on this. That's part of the resistance. There's also the fact that there are people in our churches who are executives in oil and gas companies, and they feel personally threatened when we talk about this. The Lakewood Church had a terrible split because of that, as they voted to become a creation justice church, and that was blocked by one family. There are many factors involved, and it goes from great big philosophical ones to a question of my job is at stake and I am going to react defensively.
What Peter just said reminded me that when I spoke to the conference annual meeting of the South Central Conference, so these are all the UCC churches in Texas and Oklahoma, and maybe a couple in Mississippi. So it represented about 110 churches, if I recall correctly. And there was a conversation about what it means to have a bunch of UCC church members employed by oil, coal, and gas, and how to figure that out. And somebody, kind of in a wisecracking way, said to me something like, well, it'd be really something, Antal, if you were to be willing to engage in a public debate, I don't know, with an oil leader or something like that. And my immediate response was, I would be more than glad to sit in any of your churches and debate Rex Tillerson. He, at that time, before he became Secretary of State, was the CEO of Exxon. But please, it's coming.
Peter, I'd like to thank you and Jim for talking about this subject, because truly it is one that is of some concerns. One element that you forgot had to do with medication, and medication, as it's created, has a lot of byproducts that has to be thrown away. So you have a lot of our infrastructure, our water, primarily contaminated. And no one's really talking about it. And the only reason I know about it is because I used to drive by Abbott Laboratories every day. And one day, my windshield turned yellow, and my glasses turned yellow. And I called Environmental Protection Unit to complain about it. Well, first I called Abbott, and it was a security guard who picked up and wouldn't transfer me to any place else. So I called EPA the next day, and they said, oh, well, get right on it. They did not. So the point I'm trying to make is that it's much more invasive than everyone here realizes. And it's important that we do try to be informed and you know, as opposed to just knowing the surface issues about it. It's much more invasive, and it affects everyone in a more basic way that has to, as I said, even do with the medication that you take each day and what's being said about that. The other point I wanted to make is this, and that is, where is, I was hoping to hear during this session about what's being done about revitalizing those churches that are marginal. It's nice to have people to go out and complain, write letters and march, but we're faith-based. Where is God in all of this? And what are we doing to bring younger people into it? What are we doing to draw people? I know that this is a new world. I know it's a complicated issue, but we have to see that as well. And Congregation Alive must be alive. And it's alive through the churches. And we need to fill the pulpits. We need to bring in a younger group. I'm looking at the ages of the people that are here. We need to do something about it. And although this is important, I think that bringing younger people in can really attack these issues much more effectively than we can. I'm tired.
And Deborah, personal and maybe peripheral, but after Jim preaches here tomorrow, there are going to be people from First Plymouth and from Wash Park UCC who will gather after the service in Plymouth Hall and have conversations about what is the future of our churches. And some of us are going to be insistent that we say our two churches have a commitment to God's creation that has to inform who we are and how we do church. But we're very aware that we are old and declining churches, and we got to face up to that.
I'm, as some of you have learned, part of the Plymouth UCC in Fort Collins. And part of our purpose as a congregation is to make visible the reign of God. And that may be common language among churches in the denomination. I only know about this one. And we're organized around ministry teams, which means we've got 10 people who are working hard on one issue and another issue and another issue, and one of which is climate. But, you know, speaking to the partnership with secular groups issue, we cannot bring in the reign of God about climate issues by ourselves. We need those activist organizations in Larimer County and beyond who are worried about air quality. I talked to an Iranian student from CSU. She says, what do you mean of air quality issues? You know, she comes from Tehran. She knows about air quality issues. But the people who've been studying what the oil and gas industry is doing, even in a small way in Larimer County, let alone Weld County next door, are incensed and working their butts off to try to get better regulations from the county commissioners. And, you know, we can't do that as 10 people at Plymouth Church. We can do it when we ally ourselves with the people who know the issues, understand the issues, and can organize better than we can to get the job done.
I'm aware, an hour and a half seemed like a long time when we first started, and now we're running out of time. In a few minutes, we will wrap up in here and we go to workshop groups. Let me name the 4 sessions that we have this morning. The one that will be in the Commons room with the Zoom feed, and Carl Berg will be leading us in a panel discussion involving 3 at least of the creation justice churches that have found that designation within the Rocky Mountain Conference, and will help the rest of us understand what it means to take on that designation. Unlike the old Hold Earth thing where you could pass a resolution that said whatever you wanted and call yourself that, this is a certification. The National Church says, have you done the right things to call yourself a creation justice church? And it can be a powerful thing for a local church to work through that process and claim that role. Chris Gilmore will be leading a session on environmental justice, a Rocky Mountain case study, looking at those specific neighborhoods in Northwest Denver that are sometimes called the most polluted zip code in America, with people from that neighborhood joining in the conversation. There's another group led by a person from 350 Colorado that will be looking at the just transition issues in the state of Colorado and what might go to the legislature and what we need to do about that. And I think she's going to be rather excited to hear about our conversation this morning. And a person from First Universalist will lead a session on mindful eating and whether or not we should be choosing to be vegetarian, as many of you have chosen. Don't jump up yet, Noni. We still have 8 minutes.
She raised her hand back here.
Yeah. Briefly, please.
You know, we talked about the overarching issue of the church being climate justice or climate change or climate crisis, climate emergency, I kind of like that. And yet one thing that has also been touched upon is, why do we have a climate crisis? So you could quickly say, well, it's, greenhouse gases, it's the fossil fuel. But it's really not, to me. It goes before that. It has to do with that we think we're separate from nature. It has to do with a lot of that's been discussed. Because if you believe that you're one, kind of more like indigenous beliefs, then every decision is different. And so if we had believed we were one, we could have addressed the climate crisis because we go, oh, this isn't working for us because we are all one. So the only thing I want to relate back to within the church, and both, I don't see Peter here, but also the other Peter.
Peter Penning.
Yes, thank you. And then you're in Allison's session. How the church deals with this is, well, part of it is like some of the church theology or doesn't work anymore, or it doesn't work for the young people. And this idea of the vertical theology and more horizontal theology, which I believe in, because if God is everywhere. So I think they're kind of related, that what you take back to your church is sometimes the message of like, well, hey, our overarching issue is going to be climate change. But if you go and say, one of our overarching issue is, how do we see ourselves? How are we one? You might get more resonance. I mean, and in your session too, you know, there's different ways to address this, and we need all of them.
I think we probably need to be wrapping this up.
All right.
As you look at this conversation this morning, Jim, and the weekend, in the remaining couple of minutes, what stands out for you? Time's up.
So, what stands out for me is that in the past, in the previous couple of days, Peter and I had a lot of voice, didn't we? And in the past hour and a half, you all have had a lot of voice. And that stands out for me. I am so deeply moved by all of the different things that have been said. The range, the depth of things that have been said. And you know, I can assure you that, I will go back to Vermont and to my future engagements like this, of which I have several already, in the works. And I will tell those gatherings about what has happened in the past hour and a half. Because what I've heard in the past hour and a half is a whole bunch of different ways in which you have taken to heart the previous 2 days and, for many of us, the previous many years, and have churned it around and come to some clarity about how God is calling you for your next witness, for your next manifestation of faithfulness in relation to this issue. So that's my response to your question. How do you respond to your question?
I have been astounded and delighted with the sort of emerging sense that came up this morning that has said, just transition may be the gathering point for us. Not the only issue, but this is what a witness might be, that we as the United Church of Christ and Interfaith can hold together the great big global climate things and the questions of local justice and community, and facilitate a transformational conversation that nobody else is doing in this region. That Just Transition Roundtable tried to get representatives from the oil and gas industry, and one pipe fitter union person that was in the group said that the other pipe fitters won't even talk about the transition because they want to, it is too frightening, and it gives credibility to those of us who want the transition. That's not a viable place to be entering into this conversation. So I am delighted to hear that. And I'm also delighted that there's a lot of other stuff going on with issue activism and worship themes and whatnot. Let me say again that the Climate Justice League can serve, at least in the short term. Logan, you may not have been in the room when I promised you this. The Climate Justice League can be the coordinating piece, perhaps, and keep us in conversation. And so go hit the card table out there and sign up if you want to be intentional about being part of that. I thank you, because you folks have really invested in this morning. Jim and I were concerned that the passion wasn't there yesterday. Your passion is here this morning. We're going to go somewhere with this. And I would like us, as we wrap up, it is 10:29 according to the clock there, In our Earth Aware worship session yesterday, we pointed at a couple of hymns, one of which is a new one that has come from the United Kingdom. And I've invited Allison, come on up, to, at her choice, read or sing this hymn, because I think it speaks to us very well this morning and is a benediction as we go out to fill our coffee cups and go to workshops.
And I'll echo Peter, go out and sign up on the Creation Justice League table to be involved. This is a hymn, so you'll hear some hymn cadences. I won't sing it for you. The author is Brian Davis. It's to a familiar tune. It's called, O God of Boundless Hope. O God of boundless hope, we need your Spirit's power. Creation's crisis deepens with each passing hour. So make us strong to speak your word and make it heard and right what's wrong. Too many suffer now from fire and wind and rain as livelihoods and homes are lost and hope seems vain. Will we ignore all those who strive just to survive and close our door? The world is changing fast and warming year by year. A tipping point is close. The time to act is here. We'll work and pray. As nature bleeds, we'll sow the seeds of hope today. Together, we will walk the new way you reveal. Our planet cries from wounds that love alone can heal. Inspire us, Lord, to give and care, that all may share your earth restored. Amen.
Amen.
Noni.
Thank you. A few housekeeping items before we break up. They're your name card holders. They belong to the conference office, so if you'll drop them off at the registration desk on your way out. Also in your folder, there's an event evaluation. This helps the committee going forward. I won't be on it. I've done 5 of them. I think that's plenty. To decide maybe what to do next time and if there were ways of us improving. Also, if you've enjoyed the workshops that you have been able to attend, we owe a very big debt of gratitude to Peter Sawtell. Due to his ministry, he had all these connections and he planned all of those. So thank you, Peter. So we will be back after the workshops. Go to lunch. We've got another catered lunch for you, and then back in here after lunch for a short wrap up and worship session to be send you on your way safely. So God bless you. Thank you for being here, and we'll talk one more time before it's over.